Joining us on the line now from the UK is Helen Hallam. It's to talk about gender recognition. Helen got in touch with me, sending me an email as a queer woman wanting to speak about what it means to be transsexual. She's the secretary of the Cayley LGBTQ group, and the gender recognition reform in Scotland has very much been in the news recently, with the law making it easier for people in Scotland to change their legal gender. Welcome to the show, Helen.
Thank you. Shall I introduce myself?
Please.
Yeah. My name is Helen Hallam. I'm a transgender woman. I prefer to use the term queer woman because I'm not a cis woman. A cis woman being a naturally born woman. I've always been a woman, but physically I haven't been a woman. So I had that dysphoria between the way that I think about myself and looking at my body. But for a long time, I kind of lived with that. And it wasn't a good situation. And in the late 70s, I was active in the LGBTQ group, and I was spending lots and lots of time in Spain, which I still do. And I got involved with the LGBTQ group in Malaga. And it was after the death of Franco that a lot of the lesbians and the gay men in that group were finding freedom to be able to be who they were. And if you remember the early 80s in Spain, it was a very a period of flux. It was a period of people being able to be, and I think anything kind of went. However, the lesbians in Malaga helped me. I suppose that's what I consider helped me. They introduced me to a German doctor in Marbella, and I went to see the doctor in Marbella, and he did some interviews and kind of counselling, and I found out that he was working not just for the University of Malaga, but it was also working for the hospital in Gibraltar, and so he had a good understanding of what it meant to be trans. Anyway, what happened after a period of discussion with him, counselling, if we want to call it that, he started, and he provided the hormones that are required, and he provided blockers. So that was kind of on my road. It started in Marbella. And as time went on, I decided that I didn't want the blockers anymore, that this is not who I am. And I had a big talk to him, and he said, well, he could perform an operation. And that's what he did.
Can I just stop you there, Helen? Sorry, I just wanted to ask you about blockers. What are blockers? What do they do?
Well, for a trans woman, it's no good taking estrogen without stopping the testosterone.
Right.
So you've got to have the two. You've got to have the female hormones, and you've got to block the male hormones.
Okay.
So that's what the blockers are.
Right. Stopping the male hormones.
Yeah, to allow the estrogen to do its job.
Okay.
And so, to cut the story short, basically, when I came back to England, and I got in touch with the gender identity clinic. At that time, there wasn't any waiting list, so I had to go. I was referred by my GP to the gender identity clinic, and I had a series of interviews with a psychiatrist. And after the first month, they said, "Yeah, there's no doubt about it, Helen. You're suffering from what they call gender dysphoria. However, you have to see another psychiatrist," which I did. I saw another psychiatrist, and after about 6 weeks, that psychiatrist said, "Yeah, that's okay. I agree with the diagnosis." And then I had to go see another psychiatrist, but in Sheffield, out of West Yorkshire. I had to go to a different area, and that was a very grueling kind of a session and sessions. But at the end of that, they said, well, we feel that this diagnosis is okay. So at that point, I could go ahead with the full transition, which I did. I was quite prepared to pay for it in Spain. Well, actually, they were going to send me to Essen in Germany. But the National Health Service wasn't under pressure in the same way it is now. There was no waiting list at the gender clinic. So within about 6 weeks, I'd had the operation. And here we are. My body and my brain, if you like, my emotions are the same. And it was a great liberation for somebody in my position.
So you're now, so if you don't mind me asking, so that you're saying that you're now physically a woman? Physically
and mentally.
Okay.
The first question that the psychiatrist asked me at the gender identity clinic was, so, it was French. So, Helen, you want to be a woman? I said, no, I don't want to be a woman. I am a woman. I've always been a woman. And basically, that when I was a child, I knew. When I got to 14, I talked to my parents about it. And my parents said, well, you grow out of it. It's something you grow out of. So I didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. After about another year, I was almost 15. And I said, look, I'm not growing out of this. This is who I am. And it was 1960. So a long time ago. And what my parents said, look, if you persist in going down this path, if this is what you're feeling, we have to take you to the doctors. The doctor will refer you to, they used to call it mental hospitals, the psychiatric hospital. At that time, they called it mental hospitals. And what will happen there, I don't know if you realise, but you'll get electric shock treatment.
Oh,
well, when you're 15 years old, that frightens the hell out of you.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
Feel, yeah. Fortunately for me, or unfortunately, the 60s had started. I was growing up in the 60s. I could grow my hair. I could grow my nails. I could dress in a unisex way. So I'd left school at 15 and I went to work in a factory. And I'll come on to that in a minute. But anyway, basically, later on in my life, I went into education and ended up teaching behavioural sciences to social workers. So basically, I am who I am. Now, this is what I've got to say. I'm not a cis woman. I'm not a naturally born woman. I'm a queer woman. However, my experiences are not the same as a natural woman. They can never be the same as a natural woman. But the path that I've had to go down, the abuse, the discrimination, the misogynistic kind of people that I've had to deal with have been the same. So although my life path has not been parallel, it's not been the same as a naturally born woman, but it's been parallel, but slightly different.
Yes.
And so basically, that's who I am.
Helen, can I ask you some questions, please? I'm making notes. I'm listening to everything that you're saying. And first of all, I want to say how happy I am that you've managed to get all the operations done and that you feel a lot more comfortable in your own body and in your own skin. That must be a wonderful feeling for you.
It is.
Yeah. Well,
it's a wonderful feeling because I've been in a same-sex relationship for 30 years. We could only marry when David Cameron decided to put it through Parliament. And I've got big thanks to David Cameron for doing that, for allowing same-sex marriage. So we were able to marry in 2014.
And
so that's a big
can I ask you, if you don't mind me asking, in 2014 you hadn't had the operations or anything then, had you? Oh, you had?
Yes, I had.
Okay.
Oh, yes, I had. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
That's what I'm trying to say. For me, it's been a very long time.
Yeah.
And I can see lots of trans people struggling.
Mm.
And,
can I ask you what the difference is, or the similarity is? What is the difference between transgender and transsexual? Are they completely different meanings?
A transsexual is somebody that has actually been identified as having gender dysphoria. So that I would be a transsexual, but people still say trans.
Yeah. And transgender is somebody who is actively changing their gender. Is that right?
That's correct. They're trying to change the gender.
Okay. So you can be both.
Yes, you can be both. Yeah. I suppose you can be both transgender and transsexual, but transsexual has definitely gone through the process. And right. I would say that for me, transsexual is about having gone through the medical process and become who you are. Mm. I think that's the difference.
I want to ask you about going back to when you were at school and you were talking to your parents and saying that you felt different. You felt like you were a girl, and they said it was a phase and that you'd grow out of it. That subject comes up a lot when we talk about it, and we talk about the fact that some kids may feel like that, and the sort of reality is that they might grow out of it. How do children and parents know whether it's a serious thing that's going to last with that child throughout their life, or whether they're going to grow out of it? That's a really difficult one, it seems.
I don't think parents can know. One of the things about, and I think I put this in my email, one of the things about, for me, and I know it's the case for many, many people, sexuality is a continuum. It's not fixed for all time. In fact, I would say that I'm in several lesbian groups, and one of the groups that I'm in is called Older and Wilder. It's for older lesbian women. And many of those women have been married and had husbands and had children. And it's only when they've got to their late 30s, maybe early 40s, that they have been able to say, well, this is not who I am, and and come out as lesbian.
Mm. Yeah, it's very sad to think of people not feeling like themselves, or feeling like they can be themselves throughout a lot of their life. So I think it's a huge positive step that we've been taking in society in the last however many decades or so, where it's all being discussed, it's being more open, and these operations are allowed to take place for people.
I think I've got great respect for the Tavistock Institute. And they do not take and have not taken cases of children with gender dysphoria lightly. And I think there's been a lot of hype about that. The thing about children, really quite young children, I think it's not appropriate to put them on blockers. Mm. But a child that's approaching puberty, and it was certainly, I was approaching puberty when I actually had to say to my parents, this is who I am, in a very definite way. It would have been wonderful if I could have been on blockers at that point to give me a chance to really come to some decisions about who I was. But it was 1960. And in 1960, people didn't know very much about those things. And certainly my parents didn't know much about those things. Coming from a working class background, They had no idea. What I said earlier was quite true, that being around in the 60s was a saving grace for me, because I could mix one of the things that I did, and I think this may apply to many young people, is they start to take decisions for themselves a little bit more when they realise that who they are is not being recognised. And I certainly did that. And at 15, I was... the reason I didn't stay in education was I left school. I could leave school at 15. I was working. I was mixing with all kinds of, within the gay community. And as I say, I could have a life built around myself. And I stopped at that point at 15 years old, really taking much notice of anybody that didn't kind of accept who I was. It wasn't put it out of my mind. I remember making a conscious decision. This is who I am. This is who I'm going to be.
Helen, I'm sorry. We're really, really pushed for time, and there's so much I want to ask you. If I could just ask you a few more questions on this, with regards to children, because again, this has been in the press a lot recently. That it's becoming easier for children to go on blockers, as you mentioned, and also wearing, I've forgotten what they call it when the breast bandages. Pushing the breast out. Yeah. Is that what they're called? Yeah. Various things like that are available for children now in some schools, in some areas. And there's a kind of a worry with adults thinking, well, how is this becoming so much more of a regular occurrence? I keep reading all these statistics in the paper of people speaking out saying, 4 in 10, no, it can't be 4 in 10, 1 in 10 or something children at school are transgender. It seems like it's not like one person in the school. It's a few people in every class, which seems incredible.
Well, it is incredible. And those figures, and I do understand what you're saying, and it is incredible. And as much as I like Nicola Sturgeon to bring in the legislation that she's brought in for transgender people in Scotland and I'm speaking as a queer woman, is totally out of order. I think you cannot say a person should... There are about 200,000 trans women in the UK. Only 5,000 of us have gender recognition certificates. It was the first thing I did as soon as I'd had my operation was to apply for a gender recognition. I was one of the first people to get it. And to say to somebody, well, you can change your gender willy-nilly without any medical intervention, without any counselling, without any psychiatrist being involved, it's a total nonsense.
Yeah.
A total nonsense. However, young people that feel that they are non-binary, that haven't made up their mind, about the sexuality, I think for them, they should be allowed to put X instead of male and female as a non-binary person. I do feel that part of the legislation is good.
And for people who aren't quite aware, because that's a phrase that we hear a lot now, non-binary. I think Sam Smith is non-binary, and a lot of people again don't really understand what that means. Can you just explain?
Well, it's a person that because they're on the sexuality continuum, they don't recognise that they're either male or female, and their sexuality floats. So sometimes they may want to be more feminine, sometimes more masculine. That's just simply how it is.
And it's difficult, I think, for people to understand because they kind of associate being a man or being a woman with genitalia, I guess, don't they? I think that's the kind of simplistic way of looking at things.
The problem that I've got is that the language used by the government, by the Prime Minister, by Liz Truss, by the Home Secretary and various other government officers speak about transgender without actually understanding what the process is. And as a transgender woman, as a queer woman, what safe space do I go into? If I'm abused or raped, what safe space have I got? Well, as it happened, at 15 years old, I was raped by a middle-class male. The police didn't do anything because he was educated and I was a bright young thing playing around. So nothing happened.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Well, many women have to put up with that and have to deal with it. But for a transgender person, where is their safe space?
Yeah. It's difficult to know that when we've talked on Women Talk or Men Talk, the issue of changing rooms in department stores. You have men's changing rooms and you have women's changing rooms. And there's this whole big kind of argument and nobody really understanding where is the right place for a transgender person to change.
That's correct. For me, because I'm fully a woman.
Yeah.
Physically and mentally, I don't have any issues, but other people may have issues. That's my problem.
And what about the issue? You've had all the operations, so you are physically a woman. What about people who were in your position before you had the operation? You feel like a woman, but you have male reproductive parts.
Exactly. So I had to scuttle into disabled toilets or whatever.
Okay.
I don't have to do that now, thank goodness.
Yeah.
The other issue is the high-profile cases of transgender women that have raped women. And, there's been several cases of that. But what people are not looking at is that there were almost 300,000 sex crimes in the UK last year. 997 police officers from the Metropolitan Police have been investigated for sexual harassment and sexual crimes. So I think to single trans women out and say they are a risk, I don't think they're any more risk than any other person in the society. Because not all men are rapists.
No, of course. Wow, I really, really appreciate you coming on the show, Helen Hallam. Thank you so much for answering the questions. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure many of the listeners will as well. It would be great to have you on again if there's all these issues are being discussed in the press all the time. It would be lovely to have you on the program again, if that's okay.
That's perfectly fine. I just felt that a trans person, a trans woman, a queer woman like me should be able to say, we are who we are. And all we're asking for is something about equality of opportunity and the respect that anybody would get. That's it. No less.
Yeah.
We're not asking for any special privilege.
Well, I respect you very much, Helen, and I thank you very much for joining us on Talk Radio Europe.
You're welcome.